Let's now implement a route handler for post requests so that we can actually add a new tour to our dataset. And so just like with the get request handler, let's start by adding a new route. So app.post this time. And remember, now we use post, so the post method here, because, well, that's the kind of request that we want to handle. So requests that are made with the HTTP post verb, right? So v1 and tours. And so just as we talked about in the REST API lecture, the URL is actually exactly the same. So no matter if we want to get all the tours or if we want to create a new tour, the URL is exactly the same. The only thing that changes is the HTTP method that we use for doing these requests. So get to get all the tours and post to create a new tour, right? Then in here, our typical callback function, where we get access to the request and to the response object so that we can get some data from the request and send back an appropriate response. Now, remember that with a post request, we can send data from the client to the server, right? And this data is then ideally available on the request, okay? So the request object, again, is what holds all the data, all the information about the request that was done. And if that request contains some data that was sent, well, then that data should be on the request, right? Now, out of the box, Express does not put that body data on the request. And so in order to have that data available, we have to use something called middleware, okay? And we're going to talk in great detail about middleware in a couple of lectures. But for now, in order to make this work, we need to include a simple middleware here at the top of the file. So actually right here. And what we need to do is to say app.use and then express.json. Okay, and that's it. So again, this express.json here is middleware. And middleware is basically just a function that can modify the incoming request data. So it's called middleware because it stands between, so in the middle of the request and the response. So it's just a step that the request goes through while it's being processed. And the step the request goes through in this example is simply that the data from the body is added to it. So it's added to the request object by using this middleware. Okay? So we use app.use in order to use middleware like this. All right? And again, we will talk a lot more about middleware a bit later in this section. For now, just know that this is how we use middleware. Okay? And all the details will then follow later. So for now, just to start, I want to actually show you the data from the body in the console, just to verify that it actually works. And so, rec.body. And so again, body is the property that is going to be available on the request because we used that middleware a couple of moments ago, right? So we want to log rec.body to the console, and then we also need to send back a response. So res.send, and for now, just some placeholder here. Just done, okay? So we always need to send back something in order to finish the so-called request-response cycle, which again, we're going to learn a bit more about later in this section. So let's now test this out and create a new request for the post. Now here in Postman, we can do something really nice, which is to save all of these requests. All right, so I'm going to start by creating a new collection, which I will call natures. So new collection, and now I will save this request inside that collection. So this one is get all the tours. Put it into natures and save. And so now we have our get request right here. All right. So let's now copy this one here, create a new one. And so this one is a post request. And before doing it, I will actually also save it right to this collection. So create new tour. Okay, and so here on the left side, we now have both of our requests, right? So let's now actually specify our body here. So the data that we basically want to send to the server. So we come here to body, and there are different ways of doing it now, But the easiest one is to simply say raw and then application JSON. And so all we have to do here is to basically specify some JSON, and that will then get transmitted to the server. So the first thing we want to specify is the name of the tour. And remember that in JSON, everything has to be in quotes, and actually double quotes, not just any quotes. So let me just call this one the test tour. And let's take a look at what else we have in the tour data. So we have the name, we have the duration, and let's just put also the difficulty. Okay, so I'm not going to specify all of these because that takes way too much time. Let's just say the duration is 10 days and the difficulty is easy. Okay, so that is our body that will be transmitted to the server. So let's test that out now, hitting send, and here we get back our response, which is done, remember. And so here's the response that we sent, so done. And you see that down here in our console, we now have an object which is basically the JSON that we sent in our body, right? So perfect, it works. It is no longer JSON, as you can see, it is really a JavaScript object. And just to show you that we really need this middleware, let's comment this one out, send it again, and so now we no longer have the request.body, right? So that's why it's undefined now, because it no longer exists. So give it a save, send our request again, and so now it's back. All right. So we have our post route all set up, it's working now, and we also get access to the body. And so what we want to do now is to actually persist that data into this tour's simple JSON file. All right. So we're actually going to modify this file so that the data is saved to our fictional database here. Okay. So this JSON file right now kind of works as our fictional database. Okay. And so let's now take care of that. So I'm going to go ahead and comment this one out. And so let's get started. And the first thing we need to do is to figure out the ID of the new object. So remember, again, in the lecture about REST APIs, is that when we create a new object, we never specify the ID of that object. The database usually takes care of that, okay? So a new object usually automatically gets its new ID. While in this case, we do not have any database. And so what we're going to do is to simply take the ID of the last object and then add one to that. Okay, so let's do that very quickly, and that's just basic JavaScript. So new ID, it is the tours, right? So remember that tours, we already have the data in this tours variable, right? So that's an array of all the tour object. And so we want to get the last one, which is tours.length -1, then the ID property of that, and we add 1. So that is the new ID. Next up, we create a new tour, and that tour will basically be the body that we sent plus the new ID that we just created. Okay, and so we can use object.assign, which basically allows us to create a new object by merging two existing objects together. So the first object is going to be ID is equal to new ID, and then we want request.body. Okay. Now we could also had done request.body.id equals the new ID, but I did not want to mutate the original body object. Okay, and so I just left it like this, right? So that is the new tour, and now what we want to do is to push this tour into the tour array, right? So tours is the array of the 9 tours that we have at this point. And so we say push and push the new tour in there. Okay, so that is the array which now has the new tour in it, but of course now we have to persist that into the file. And that again is quite easy for you at this point. So we use fs.writeFile. And now which one should we use? So write file or write file sync. And the answer for that is very simple. So we are inside of a callback function that is going to run in the event loop. And so we can never, ever block the event loop. And so what we're going to do is to use write file and not the synchronous one. So we want to pass in a callback function that is going to be processed in the background, and as soon as it's ready, it's going to put its event in one of the event loop queue, which is then going to be handled as soon as the event loop passes that phase. Remember that from the event loop lecture? Anyway, let's get the file name from up here, because we will really overwrite this file so that when we restart the server, it's then going to be there. Okay, so so right here. So that is the file where we want to write to, then the data that we want to write, which is tours, and then our callback function, which in this case only has the error. Okay, and here I just noticed that we need to also stringify this object, right? So we want JSON in this JSON file, and this right now is just a plain normal JavaScript object, and so we need to convert that. But that's again simple. Already did that, so that's JSON stringify of the object. Okay, so what do we want to do as soon as the file is written? Well, what we usually do is to send the newly created object as the response. So let's do that. So response, and then as always we start by specifying the status code. And in this case, it's not going to be a 200, but a 201. So 201, which means created. So 200 stands for OK, 201 stands for created, which is exactly what happened here. So we created a new resource on the server. So JSON, and it keeps adding this message here. So status is again success. Then I'm not using the results property here that we had before, because now I'm only sending back one result. So data is our envelope here, and then tour is new tour. And that's it. Give it a save here. And so that formatted or code a little bit. Let's add some more space here. And yeah, I think we're ready to now give it a try. So we can actually create a new tour using this data here. So adjust this test tour and with this data, and so let's wait for it. And what happened here? Let's see. Okay, we have a problem that we sent a response twice, basically. So we sent a response here with JSON and then again with .send. And that's not allowed, and that's actually why we get this error here. So it's actually nice that it happened here so that you know what this kind of standard error here means. So HTTP header send cannot set headers after they are sent to the client. And so that happens when you try to send two responses. All right? So we need to get rid of that. Yeah, so that was the only error that we had. And so, yeah, that should now fix it. Give it a try. And indeed, here we go. So we have our ID of 10, which our code created for us, and then the entire tour, which is exactly the data that we sent as a body in our request, right? Now, the thing is that when we do get all tours here, it will not yet show up. So if we go down here, oh, actually it is already here. So we have the one from before. So when we had that error, it actually also created this tour here. And then of course the tour that we just created with the ID of 10. So this tour here is exactly this one that was created right now. So if we do now test tour 2 with a duration of just 5, let's give this one a try. And if I now do get all tours, then that shows up here as well. And I said in the beginning that it wouldn't work, so that it wouldn't show up right away, because this only works if we restart the server, right? Because this file, so the toursimple.json file, where our tours are coming from, is only read at the beginning when we start the server, okay? Now the thing is that each time we save something to this JSON file, it will also reload the server. And let me prove that to you. So if I hit now save, then look what happens down here. So I save it, and so you see that down here it restarted the server. It also formatted the code because of prettier, but what matters here is that this code updated. And that's why each time we save something here with our API, it will then immediately reload the server and will reload the content from the file into the tours, and we can then read that right away. Okay, and so that's why we have access immediately to all the newly created tours. Okay, makes sense? Well, if not, please feel free to just ask your questions in the course Q&A section. All right?